Hello students, Mr. Sims here. We are Module 4, Day 2. This will be the first video. The second video for Day 2 will be an enrichment. That's a little bit later on in the pages. So go ahead and get started with our lesson objective. And our lesson objective is I can find the whole amount given the part and the percent. All right, so what's different about these problems from day one is that when you set your percent over 100, the x is going to go on the bottom because you're going to be given the top number. And that's going to be the only difference in the proportion today from what we did the other day. So two examples here, and then there are some exercises that will be your check-in, your checkpoints, and then some independent practice, and then the enrichment as we go from there, if you get to that part. Example number 1, finding the whole amount. All right, how many students are in the band? Okay, so as I go back and read, 42 students that play wind instruments represent 75% of the students who are in the band. Okay, so I'll use a tape diagram to represent because I really like the visuals here. So you have your 100%, which is you always start off with a 100% line of tape, I guess if you want to call it that. Right. And you have 75% of the students who play the wind instrument. Right? So that 42 is the 75. So as we set this up, the 42 goes with the 75. And we're trying to find how many students are in the band. We're trying to find the whole amount. So here's how the tape diagram translates into the proportion. You still have your percent over 100. Okay? And that 42 is the 75%. So the 42 has to match the 75% who play a wind instrument. I'll use WI to represent wind instrument. And then the X goes on the bottom. All right, so then we would cross multiply. And just like day one, I'm going to model the algebraic method here. So I'm going to 75 times X would be 75X. 100 times 42 would be 4,200. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 75 to get my x. I want you to keep in mind that the reason that I'm having you do it this way, or having you write it out this way at least, is because eventually you're going to have to use algebra to do proportions. So we get 56 total students. Okay, and then you can ask yourself, does it make sense? Well, the only thing it wouldn't make sense is if this number, this 56, was smaller than the 42. Right? And there's really only one way you're going to mess that up, and this is if you put the x in the wrong spot. All right, moving on to example number 2. All right, and this one's just going to be just slightly different, I believe, if I remember in this example correctly. How many more miles does Kurt have? More miles. Okay, I'm going to make sure I emphasize that because sometimes we're missing problems because we're not reading close enough to get to his destination. All right, Kurt has driven 76 miles on his road trip, but he has 70% left of his trip to go. All right, so this is why sometimes tape diagrams can really help. So 100% is going to be the entire trip. All right, so Kurt has driven 276 miles of his road trip, but he has 70% of his trip left to go, which means that he's only traveled 30% of his trip. All right, let me show you how that makes sense. So he's already traveled 276 miles. Okay, so he's gotten to this point. He has 70% of his trip left to go. So this 276 represents the 30% that he's already traveled. Right? And here's what you're really looking for. We're not actually looking for the total amount. We're really looking for what he has left. So this is going to involve a couple of steps. So we're going to start off with my 30%. So we're not using 70%. We're going to use 30%. 30%, 100. The 276 over x. And when we solve this proportion, what we're going to be finding is we're going to be finding how many miles it is for his entire destination. So Okay, so you got 30x equals 27600, divide 30. Would be 920 miles. So that's the total amount. So then there's one additional step. Now to figure out how many more miles he would have to take, you would have to take the 920 and subtract off the 276. And then 644 miles left. Alright, so then you've got exercises that are on page 9, and then there's independent practice on page 10 and 11, and then if you get far enough, then there's an enrichment video that starts at the bottom of page 11. So